Hey guys, so this is a response really to one of the clips I put out a couple of weeks back, which got quite a few comments and DMs. It was a 90-second clip, actually out of a way longer video, about 20 mins, which was discussing non-duality and dissolving illusions and beliefs around the ego, the mind, and the body. And so the clip was really discussing how reality is not what it seems, and the examples used were around colour and sound, which is generated in the brain as we know it. And as expected, this ruffled a few people's belief systems and feathers. So there were comments like, keep taking drugs, and what authority do you have to talk about this nonsense? So it clearly shook a few people up, which is natural. But there were also some good questions too involved in it. So I'm going to break it all down in this longer format video, just so we can get to the grips with a few of these things in more detail. And maybe I can persuade you. I mean, it's not me, this is neuroscience and physics as well. So, yeah, let's have a chat about it. So, I used to be, my authority on this, right, is I used to be a sound engineer. I used to be sound engineer and sound designer. I worked for a company in 2004, which was doing, in Soho in London, doing sound for TV, film, commercials, films, trailers, etc. And part of that, what I did, we used to joke and call it the fringe division. This was with a guy called Ivor Taylor and Steve Lane. We were working on 3D audio at the time. This was just before the birth of VR and virtual reality. And in binaural sound, which is how you record 3D sound, this has got nothing to do with binaural beats. We would put little microphones. You'd either use a dummy head called Sandra, or you'd put little mics in my ears, and we go around picking up sound as we humans hear it, how it, is different between each ear. And what that would do is when you record those sounds on playback with headphones, it would recreate the entire sound field. So you'd get great depth and surround sound behind, and depth perception and height, etc. What it failed to do, which was what we were tasked with trying to fix, it was known as the front-back confusion. Sounds that were recorded and should be located at the front, the brain shoved to the back. So our job, which took us down into neuroscience, physics, understanding the nature of reality and how the brain maps our perception and constructs our reality. And and off the back of that, I wrote articles for the Huffington Post on the illusion of reality and how the brain is constructing it using prediction models. So I have a small amount of skin in the game and a good baseline in order to discuss some of these things. So let's dive into it using basic neuroscience and physics. I'm not saying reality isn't real. There isn't anything out there that the brain is mapping everything and therefore there's no external world. Of course the physical world exists. What I'm saying is that the way we experience reality is constructed by our central nervous system, the brain, etc. So the example I used, which was colour, objects out in the world don't contain any colour. They reflect different wavelengths of the electromagnetic radiation. So wavelengths enter your eye, they bounce off the light bounces off objects, the wavelengths enter the eye, they hit the retina, where there's these specialised cones inside that detect these different wavelengths of light. Those signals then travel through the optic nerve to the visual cortex and the occipital lobe at the back of the brain. Within that system, there's an area called V4, which neuroscientists know play a major role in colour perception. And that's where the brain constructs the experience that we call colour. So reds, blues, greens, they're not out there. They're not properties sitting in objects outside of you. They're interpretations that are created by the brain from wavelengths of light that happen internally in here and then are projected out onto those objects. Now the same thing's happening with sound. There's no such thing as a sound floating around the world as we experience it. Like a gunshot or a cat meowing or my voice isn't just floating around in space. It's like the cat meows going meow, 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 all the way till it hits my ears. Right? What actually exists are pressure waves and vibrations through the air. Your ears detect those vibrations, convert them into electrical signals, and it's those signals which travel to the auditory cortex, which is in the temporal lobe, and that's where pitch, tone, sound originate and are constructed by the nervous system. So without a nervous system and brain translating those vibrations, there is only vibrations and air pressure. Not the sound that we experience is out there, it's created in here. So now we're on to the subject of reality. Where it gets even more interesting is that we only perceive a very tiny slice and bandwidth of what is actually out there. Right? So we know that humans can only hear, roughly, between 20 hertz and 20,000 hertz. We know there's way more sounds out there. We know dogs, whales and other animals can hear far beyond that, up to 100,000 hertz. So there are sounds happening in the world right now that we just can't detect. Right, so that cat meow that I discussed earlier, we hear it as meow. Other animals which can hear more frequency ranges and more harmonics coming off that sound will hear that sound slightly differently. So it's all relative compared to what your sensory inputs are accepting. So the same is true with vision. And just to go back, that's the whole point. A lot of people think it's just a fixed, solid world out there. And that's just not the truth. So the same is true with vision. We only see a tiny band of the electromagnetic spectrum, which we call visible light. We know there's other light frequencies out there. There's infrared, there's ultraviolet, there's radio waves, there's X-rays, etc. They're all around us, so we can only perceive what we're geared up to. We know some animals can detect the Earth's magnetic field and use it for navigation, like turtles and homing pigeons maybe. So the brain is constantly translating a vast amount of physical information and trying to put it into a really simplified model that we can perceive. Reality itself out there, the universe, isn't actually made of colours, sounds and solid objects. So modern physics describes reality in terms of fields, energy and interactions between particles which emerge from fields. So it's fields and energy. And none of that really contains colour, sound or images. So they only arrive, as we've said, once a nervous system and brain interpret those signals. So one of the questions that was asked in the DMs or in the comments was, I used an analogy in the original clip when talking about sound, which was the Zen koan of, if a tree falls in a forest and there's no one there to hear it, does it make a sound? And obviously I said, no, it only makes vibration and air pressure. The sound we hear is constructed in the brain. And someone wrote, then why then is the sound heard on a distant video recording if the sound is only made in the brain? Which is a good question, but the recording only records air pressure and vibration, which is only what is being put out from whatever dropped the tree, in this case what we call. It needs an organism with a nervous system, so in this case a human, to process the vibrations on playback, and then the brain turns it into sound. So what does that mean? So it needs, whatever's recorded is vibration and air pressure. When you play the sound back, it needs a human brain then to process it and construct that sound into the sound of the tree falling in the head, and then project it out. So there's always a brain present, or nervous system present, whether the sound source happens live, you're there witnessing the tree fall in the forest, or you're hearing a recording of the tree fall in the forest and you're listening back to it in a studio, and needs that brain to do the conversion. So Good question, and hope that clears that up. Neuroscience has also discovered something else which is really fascinating. That we don't actually experience reality in real time. Your brain has to collect signals from the eyes, the ears, the other senses, send them through nerves, nerves go through the body and the brain, and it's got to process them. So the visual processing alone can take up to about 150 milliseconds, and other senses take roughly the same amounts of time. Some studies say a little bit longer. So technically, the moment that we experience here right now is actually a fraction of a second after the event has already happened. Now, that would be a disaster. People would be having accidents left, right, and centre. So the brain solves this problem by using prediction, and it's called predictive processing. So the brain is constantly taking in all the signals of what's happening now in the environment and trying to second guess into the future what is potentially about to happen. And then it updates that prediction with the incoming sensory information, which is why your perception of reality feels smooth and immediate. But the brain is always making a best guess. And some senses lead and take over the others. So for example, right, when I was in the studio as the sound engineer, we had big consoles at the front, and the directors and the clients and the agency people would all sit at the back. We would have roughly around 4, depending on the size of the studio, about 4 phones. So there'd be one, because of the size of the console, one on one end of the console, one on the other end. And there would be clients that have, say, 2 on the desk behind. The phones were exactly the same make and model, and had exactly the same ringtones whenever they rang. And of course, being a busy studio, the phones would never sit in the right places. They'd be scattered all over, maybe one on the console and blah, blah, blah. So when the phone rang, when I'd scan the room, whenever my eyes landed on the phone, even if the phone ringing was behind me to the right, if my eyes landed on the phone, which was at the front to the left, because visually, if you've got that sense, which most, unless you're blind, but if you've got that, that's often the lead sense, and it will dominate all the others. My brain sees the phone. Also, the sound of a phone is coming in. Even if the sound is thinking, oh, that phone is going to be placed behind you to the right, because my eyes have latched on, the predictive modelling is looking at it going, that phone should make this sound. So it maps the sound over there. So I would then roll over with my chair to the phone, pick it up, and realise, hold on, that phone's not ringing. I'd look around somewhere else, see another phone over there, the phone's still ringing, even if the phone's over there, and I'm looking over here at a different phone, my brain then maps the sound to that. So you chase the sound all around as the brain just maps the sound to whatever visual phone makes more sense. So that is one way, and there's lots of different illusions that do this, the McGurk effect, and you've obviously seen loads of other different illusions that are to do with sight. There's I can't remember what it's called, the something phi illusion, where different colours then track, where they're not actually tracking or moving, but the brain's making guesswork. So there's lots of illusions out there that fool the brain. You may have seen things in 3D or different colours with different shadings, and when you get close and look at it, obviously the colour switches and changes. So it's just the brain making a best guess. So what we experience really is our brain's translation of a much bigger physical world out there. It's a bit like a computer desktop, and this is a brilliant analogy by, I think his name is Donald Hoffman, right? And he says that your brain does, think of it like your computer desktop, an Apple Mac or PC. You've got your icons on there for ease of use. You've got the folder icon and you've got your trash can, right? So the file and the trash can are just icons of a very complex system underneath it. What's actually making that folder structure work is a whole matrix of ones and zeros and binary code and information. Same with the delete function on the trash can. But rather than you having to interact with the complicated world of code, we're making simplified images. So that is exactly what the brain's doing for reality. In the same way, colour, sounds and objects we experience are the brain's interface with reality, not the raw structure of the universe itself. So reality is still there. It's just not what we see, hear, think or believe. It's just a much bigger and stranger world than what our senses alone can show us. And we're designed, and evolution is designed for each organism and species to see a certain section that's going to benefit it, rather than everything, which would be way too much intel. So anyway, I hope that clears up some of the confusion around what I was saying in the clip. If you're interested in exploring the deeper side of this, particularly the spiritual perspective of non-duality that the original clip was referring and pointing to, then you're welcome to join our community. So inside we explore meditation, qigong, consciousness, and we do a lot of self-inquiry in much more depth. So if you're interested in that, you'll find the link in the bio, comments or description, depending on which platform you're watching this on. So thanks for watching.